Yo, what's going on, guys? Mush back at it with another video, and we can officially say it is the end of an era. No, I wouldn't put Anthem as an entire era of gaming, but certainly I feel like this game has a lot of relevance to it in the sense of it being one of the pivotal games to be a hallmark moment of the destruction of a studio in BioWare. There's a lot you can take away from it, and Anthem was released back in 2019, and at that point, all of BioWare's goodwill hadn't been eroded. Bear in mind that, you know, before Anthem, they did release Mass Effect Andromeda, but I don't think most people want to label a studio washed just after a single game unless there is some context around it. Like, I would absolutely be willing to sit down and have the conversation of Naughty Dog being washed, even though all they've done is put out one divisive game, but when you add the context of they haven't released a game in 7 years and they canceled another game, and Last of Us Part 2's narrative was so bad, you know, I can understand why you might think that studio is washed. BioWare, on the other hand, yes, they had Mass Effect Andromeda come out, and that game certainly had a mixed to negative reception, but Mass Effect Andromeda came out in like 2015, and prior to that game, you know, they put out like 5 or 6 bangers in the span of 5 or 6 years, you know? So adding that context, people obviously weren't gonna label BioWare washed just after the release of Mass Effect Andromeda. And let me actually pull up Andromeda. So I got the timeline a little bit wrong. Andromeda came out in 2017. Inquisition had come out 2.5 years prior to that in 2014, fall of 2014. But I think people still wanted to have faith in BioWare. It wasn't until Anthem that I think people's perception and hopes of BioWare really started to be destroyed, and Anthem was the shift for BioWare in taking the role of doing something that is more multiplayer oriented, going in that live service direction, which I think in 2019 and 2018, around that time, we weren't really comprehending the move to open world. I'm sure EA definitely had that idea of, oh, live service games, this is where we can make a lot of money, and maybe that was a bit of the idea with Anthem. And Anthem did, in fact, have microtransactions, but I think back in 2019, it wasn't as abundantly apparent that every studio was gonna go into the live service direction that, you know, whatever, you want to do a multiplayer game, there's gonna be a vested interest in that, especially when it's coming from a BioWare that did have so much attention. And in fact, when I initially played Anthem, when you sat down and played that game, initially from a mechanic standpoint and how that game felt and the movement of the game and the combat, I actually think there was like the skeleton of something that could have been really great, in the sense of it was a fun game to play for a little while, and then when you do realize how grindy the game was and that the gameplay didn't have a significant amount of depth, that even at a surface level, while it is fun, while it does have, I want to say, like a little bit of an arcadey feel to it, the depth isn't really there. The visuals were great, however, I think as far as longevity goes to keep people engaged, it wasn't really there. And even at that time in 2019, I don't know how much I wanted to get into a game that I was going to be invested into for years and years. But beyond that, even for the initial period, it wasn't a game that engaged me far beyond that, you know, initial couple of hours, and then I moved on really, really quickly. But Anthem was, I feel, the game that really did put people into that negative perception of BioWare, because that's when we have a problem. When you have two back-to-back games that are really negatively received, and on top of that, remember that this is the period where those game development cycles started to get longer and longer and longer. So now when Anthem came out, you're talking about it being 4.5 years removed from the release of Dragon Age Inquisition. All of a sudden, we went from BioWare putting out, you know, 6 great games in the span of 6 years or something like that, into the point of, in the span of 6 years, they had put out Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. Like, that's how quickly things change. And because it was an incredibly expensive game game to develop. Now, you could play the game solo, but obviously the long-term viability of this game came down to user engagement, microtransactions, and expansions and things of that nature. And remember that they were eventually going to do like a recreation, a reinvention of Anthem, similar to what Square Enix did with Final Fantasy XIV to kind of redo the game. I believe it was dubbed Anthem Next, and it was going to be continued as a live service game, but ultimately that never really came to fruition, and developers working on Anthem continued to be pivoted to working on Mass Effect and Dragon Age titles, and they were going to cancel whatever that recreation of Anthem ended up being, and ultimately that led to the announcement of Anthem getting canceled. When you look at the history of BioWare, I feel like a lot of people will look at Anthem, and it is really a showcase of, think about all of the other studios that have been cooked in terms of trying to do massive live service games, and Anthem ultimately did see release. Anthem came out, but you see the reception of the game and how lackluster it was, and then you look at some of the other studios that have tried to create ambitious live service projects and got away from what initially was so well received by them. Yeah, BioWare had games with multiplayer, Mass Effect 3 had multiplayer and so on and so forth, but not a large-scale live service game like this. And then you look at what happened to studios like Sony Bend as well, and I just feel like Anthem is one of those pivotal games you can look at as far as a studio just being absolutely beyond wash, really chasing that live service model, and I just don't think they've been able to be recovered since then. And it's just unfortunate with the release of Anthem, then they tried to circle back into, a Dragon Age game, and then you had Dragon Age Veilguard, and ultimately Dragon Age Veilguard didn't come out until 5.5 years after Anthem, and it's just insane to me how quickly, think about how quickly it happened. We went from the release of Dragon Age Inquisition, which I know isn't beloved by everybody, but I think the majority of people would say it's a pretty solid RPG, into Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem, and Dragon Age Veilguard for the next decade and change, for the next 12 years after the release of Inquisition. Who would have even thought that post-release of Inquisition that BioWare was about to embark on the atrocity that it was about to embark on? But no, that is exactly what has happened. And yeah, now they're doing a new Mass Effect game. Does anybody have faith in that? Probably not. I mean, I think some people still have some hope that a new Mass Effect game could be quite good. And while I'm not going to assess all of the ins and outs of Anthem in terms of how they updated the game and the experience and the community in the game, because that just wouldn't be my place to talk about it. However, I do think it's a game that will be looked back at as a bit of a case study as far as a studio that was so synonymous with their single-player games going the multiplayer route and then creating something that was to be this big live service experience and that ultimately couldn't be viable and then got shut down. And think about how long it was active for, though. 7 years, and it would have been nice for a game like this that I do think, from my time playing it, I did find the maneuverability, the combat, those elements of the game fairly fun initially, even if it lacked depth. It would have been nice if an offline component was made for the game, but no, this is one of those games that's just gonna die forever, and it is what it is. But that'll do it for me. Let me know if you guys spend more time with Anthem than I did. I know a lot of people had interest in the game on day one, and this was one of those games that was an Origin exclusive, and think about that as well. They definitely wanted, with this game being on Origin only initially, EA Access, whatever they called it, the EA app, that they were gonna soak up all of those microtransaction revenues. They didn't have to share it with Steam, and it was gonna be on EA Access, man, and we're gonna get all those microtransaction revenue, but ultimately that didn't turn out, and it was actually that fall of 2019, where EA started putting their games back on Steam with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. But that'll do it for me. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. RIP to Anthem, the end of an era, but that'll do it for me. Your thoughts down below. As always, thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out. Hey, what's going on, guys? Mush here again. Hope you enjoyed the video. As you guys might know, YouTube's notification system is sometimes a little bit wonky, even if you're subscribed to the channel. Maybe you're not abundantly aware that I uploaded a video. To remedy that situation, make sure you hit the bell notification button. This way, whenever I upload a new video, and I try to upload as consistently as possible, you will be notified directly of the upload, and you can watch it as soon as it goes live. I would really appreciate if you guys hit that button so you can stay up to date with all of the content I'm posting. But as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.